Dear brothers and sisters, imagine being in Mecca in the early days of Islam. The Prophet ﷺ was subjected to all sorts of harm. He was physically harmed, he was emotionally betrayed. They tried to psychologically torture the Prophet ﷺ. He is rahmatan lil alameen, he's a mercy to the worlds. You imagine as we sit and as we watch the images of the people of Gaza, the innocent children, women and men, elders, and we feel a great sense of helplessness, and maybe we even cry a little bit more than we used to. And that's with the little mercy that Allah has put in our hearts. Imagine rahmatan lil alameen, a mercy to the worlds, the most merciful human being that has ever walked the face of the earth, walking around Mecca and seeing people tortured in front of him because they believe in him and not being able to do anything about it. And so I wanted to actually pull from this very particular episode. It's about 5 years into the revelation of the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, where Abu Jahl decided to escalate his aggression against the Muslims because he saw that despite all of the tactics that were being used to delegitimize the Prophet ﷺ, to call him names, to deter the Muslims, cutting them off from their families, none of that was working. And so he decided to take it to the next level. And just like every pharaoh in every era, he did so by starting off with the most vulnerable of society. يُذَبِّحُونَ أَبْنَاءَكُمْ وَيَسْتَحْيُونَ نِسَاءَكُمْ. They always target the children, they target the women, they target the downtrodden, they target those who are defenseless in society, they target those who they don't fear consequence from. And so Abu Jahl decides to put on this display. And it's very interesting, as Ibn Abbas radiallahu anhuma describes the scene that he heard of later on as he grew up, the experiences of the people that lived that moment. There was an area of Banu Makhzum, which was the tribe of Abu Jahl, where he used to take them to the outskirts of Mecca, and he picked an area that had the hottest surface, no trees, nothing to protect the people from as he tortured them, and he took a group of the early enslaved Muslims out there and decided to make an example out of them, so that the Muslims in Mecca would walk by that area and they would see their brethren tied up, starved, prohibited from drinking any water, and they were completely unable to physically intervene. So imagine living in Mecca, and we talk about the pain of social media and watching this from afar. You walk by and there's an area where the people are tied up and being tortured regularly. You can hear their shouts, and you can see them barely hanging on, and you can't do anything about it. And our Prophet ﷺ used to actually go to them. And all he had ﷺ was words. He couldn't physically intervene. And as he walks by and he sees the family of Yasir, Sumayya, the Abyssinian woman Yasir, her husband, and their son Ammar, he walks by them, and Abu Jahl reserved his worst torture for them, his own slaves. And the Prophet ﷺ could only say to them, Sabran ala Yasir, maw'idukum al-jannah. Sabran ala Yasir, maw'idukum al-jannah. Be patient, O family of Yasir. Paradise is promised for you. Sumayya radiallahu ta'ala anha would respond to the Prophet ﷺ saying that we will be patient, Ya Rasulullah. We're not going to exchange our religion in the midst of this torture. And the Prophet ﷺ has to walk by that, and the Muslims have to walk by that, and you're either in it or you're walking by it. Abu Jahl is gathering a larger group and increasing the torture. Did they used to get anything out of them? Would they get them to say anything? And Ibn Abbas radiallahu ta'ala anhuma, he says that what they used to do to them is that they would lay them out. They would hit them and strike them, starve them, and they would prohibit them from water. Ammar would be tortured until he wouldn't know what he was saying anymore. And so the torture that was inflicted on them would lead them to a point that they didn't even have words. They didn't even know what they were saying. And in that process, once they got them to a point where they couldn't even sit up straight anymore, Ibn Abbas radiallahu anhuma says they were unable to even seat themselves. At that point, they would say to them, say the names of your idols, Allat, Al-Uzza. And one of them would say, as a person was shaking their face, Allat wal Uzza. They would say the names of those idols in the midst of that torture. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala revealed about those people, من كفر بالله من بعد إيمانه إلا من أكره وقلبه مطمئن بالإيمان. That those who disbelieve after faith, except for those who spoke words of disbelief, but their hearts were filled with faith. They didn't mean it, but in the midst of all of that, they were forced to say things that their hearts did not agree with. And in the midst of that torture, the severity of that torture, where he didn't even know what he was saying anymore, he said something. And he was so embarrassed from the Prophet ﷺ after that. And the Prophet ﷺ goes to him and he says, Ammar, what is it? What's wrong? And he tells the Prophet ﷺ that I said what I said. And I don't know how to reconcile with that. And the Prophet ﷺ, he says, was your heart at ease with faith? And Ammar radiallahu anhu says, yes. And the Prophet ﷺ says, in adu fa'ud. So if they do it to you again, it's okay. Do it again. It's fine. You didn't do anything wrong. Now, dear brothers and sisters, I can't think of a more fitting time, a more fitting moment for us to revisit this episode of the seerah when we're watching what we are seeing and we feel completely maghloob, completely overcome and unable to help our brothers and sisters. Imagine what it was like for your Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. And you know the heart that he has. Every single time the Prophet ﷺ has to walk by, do you know what it was like on his heart to hear the crying of Sumayya radiallahu anha? Can you even imagine for a moment what it was like for him to hear her last shout, knowing that she's the first martyr of Islam? It's not that he has any doubt about that, but hearing that woman as Abu Jahl inflicts the worst type of punishment, and in his frustration because he can't get her to say anything bad about the Prophet ﷺ, he can't get her to renounce the faith, he takes that spear and he puts it through her midsection, and the Prophet ﷺ has to hear her last shout. Imagine what it was like on his heart ﷺ. And I would say with certainty that it was more difficult on him than it is on us right now. He's seeing it, he's experiencing it. There was a woman that was being tortured next to Sumayya. Her name was Zinira radiallahu ta'ala anha. And Abu Jahl was nasty in his torture of her as well, to the point that he beat her to blindness. When he beat her to blindness, you know, sometimes Abu Jahl went a little too far and even his friends nudged him. When he beat the woman blind, they told him, settle down, you went too far. And he laughed and he said, قَدْ أَعْمَتْهَا الْآلِهَةِ. He said, the idols made her blind. I didn't do that to her. Allat wal Uzza, the gods made her blind. And as she could barely speak while she's tied up to a stick, she responds and she says, Allat wal Uzza, laysa lahuma quwwa. They have no power. No power. And Allah Azza wa Jal gives her back her eyesight, a miracle where she could see again. And Abu Jahl said, that's the sihr of Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. That's his magic, his sorcery. Because in the middle of all of these things, Allah sends these signs that even though it feels like these people are abandoned, they're not abandoned. Sabran ya ala Gaza, maw'idukum al-jannah. But then it comes back to us. Watching this, feeling a sense of guilt, feeling a sense of helplessness. Rabbi inni maghloob fantasir. Just know that your Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, he's been through that. Know that the prophets of old have been through that. Know that the companions have been through that. But what's the silver lining of this all? What comes out of this? What after this? You know what happens? Abu Jahl made the mistake that every single Fir'aun, every single Pharaoh ever makes. That they think that with brute force they can break a people down. They can break them down psychologically. And if they increase the force, they can ruin them. And they can completely devastate them. And what ended up happening is while Abu Jahl thought that he was breaking the people of Islam, he was actually breaking his own image all along. Everything that he was trying to portray of himself as a man of generosity who cared about his people and who was doing this because he had to protect people, all of that was going out the window. His own brothers, his half-brother Ayyash ibn Abi Rabi'ah, his full brother Salama ibn Hisham became Muslims. They were disgusted by him. The people that he was trying to convince that he was protecting Mecca for saw him for what he really was. and moved away from him. And he lost his claim to any sort of morality or any sort of generosity or any sort of ideal that he claimed to stand for. And the other slaves that watched that torture and weren't Muslim yet saw the strength of their brothers and sisters. And they found something inside of them. And the passerbys, who were those that were passing by and watching Abu Jahl do this, and the Muslims being tortured, they saw that. And if they weren't convinced as to which group was on truth and which group was on falsehood before that, they certainly were convinced after that. And it would be so decreed that one of those that he tortured would one day stand on his chest in the Battle of Badr. And Abu Jahl would ask him, Liman al-ghalaba, to whom does victory belong? And he would say, Al-ghalabatu lillah, wa li rasulillah, ya adu Allah. Victory is to Allah and to His Messenger, sallallahu alaihi wasallam, O enemy of God. Dear brothers and sisters, as we're living in this time, and we connect with our Messenger, sallallahu alaihi wasallam, in that moment of pain, and we feel that sense of helplessness. And the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam always spoke to his community with azima, spoke to them with determination, and instilled in them that courage to move forward. And so when the people of Gaza speak, what are you hearing? You're hearing azima, determination in the midst of it all, a refusal to be broken. A refusal to be broken psychologically. A refusal to succumb to that type of oppression. It comes back to us. What are we witnessing happening right now, dear brothers and sisters? What we're witnessing is that anyone with half a heart and half a brain can see Israel for what it is right now. Can see the genocide for what it is right now. Despite all of the blinders, despite everything that's been put in the way, anyone with half a heart and half a brain can see this for what it is at this point. What does that mean? That just like Abu Jahl made the mistake in thinking that if he increased the brutality, he could suppress the voices that would call him out and challenge him. He could suppress the resistance to his torture. The same thing is happening, inshaAllah ta'ala, around the world, where this Fir'aun, this Pharaoh, is increasing the brutality, has no shame anymore in bombing hospitals and schools, doesn't even bother to deny it anymore. And it's up to us as we're watching that to first and foremost take comfort that better than us, the Messenger ﷺ once had to walk that path, and he wasn't watching it on his screen. He was watching it right in front of him. And it was hard on his heart, sallallahu alaihi wasallam. It was hard on his heart when Fatima radiallahu anha had to come and take the guts off of his back when he was tortured, when he himself was persecuted, his own daughter in front of him crying, cleaning up the guts from his back, and he's shivering, sallallahu alaihi wasallam, because of everything that was put on him. He tells his daughter, don't cry. Inna Allaha nasirun abaki. Allah is going to support your father. You can imagine how difficult it was for him, sallallahu alaihi wasallam. What we're in right now is not more difficult than that. But the silver line in this all, and there are some that we can see and some that we can't see, is that through this, things will change bi'idhnillahi ta'ala. All of us have had our priorities shift over the last month. People's hearts have come towards this faith. People that were already Muslim have found a reconnection. And there are people that are witnessing this and saying, I cannot understand how much faith these people have and how they're able to endure what they endure and still say what they say. What is it that they have? And you have people that are looking into this religion for the very first time. Today, we have at least 3 people accepting Islam after Salatul Jumu'ah. But around the world, we're seeing this, where people are looking at that and saying, these people are a miracle.